The Matrix burst onto screens in 1999 and redefined our cinematic expectations, but it had a unique visual style and iconic action sequences that stimulated fans' imaginations with the creative possibilities of this universe. But somehow, with each new installment, the more audiences learned about this world, the more their interest dissipated. What started off as the most influential movie of the decade began a sharp decline that went out with a shrug in 2003, only to be resuscitated 18 years later with an out-of-place, tonally awkward corporate reboot that diverted fans' expectations by failing to deliver on any of them. So how did The Matrix go from this to this? Let's explore the rise and fall of the Matrix franchise. The original Matrix told the story of Thomas Anderson, office worker by day, and the notorious computer hacker known as Neo by night. He's discovered by the charismatic and slow-speaking Morpheus, who invites Neo to learn the truth about the world around him by taking the red pill, or staying in a pleasant false reality by taking the blue pill. Luckily, Neo chooses the red pill, so the story can continue, only for him to discover that his everyday reality is nothing but a computer simulation, and that real human existence behind the scenes is far more bleak, as humans are in a constant battle against the machines who want to use them as an energy source. But the good news is that Neo has the potential to be the one to save the human race, and with the right programming and self-belief, can literally do anything inside the Matrix, master kung fu, stop bullets, and even fly. Although it follows a classic hero's journey story structure, there were so many fresh ingredients that made The Matrix nothing short of outstanding. A captivating opening scene that made audiences need to know more, impactful character introductions, some strong lines of dialogue, interesting questions about the fabric of reality, good pacing, where every scene involves either learning something new or trying something new as Neo builds his knowledge and skill set. And this was all done with a unique visual style, slow motion action sequences, and cool music. There's also ongoing subplots like a betrayal from the inside, and the stakes are set from the very beginning. We know what happens if Neo fails or is not the one. But we're also told everyone who's ever fought an agent has died, making the final action sequences even more exciting. By virtually any standard, the first Matrix installment was a home run. If you were a stickler, you could give it 4 stars, but most would say 5. The movie grossed a whopping $466 million, with a budget of just $63 million, which naturally greenlit a trilogy. So 4 years later, after Lord of the Rings was all the rage for shooting its entire trilogy in one go, the second and third Matrix installments were shot concurrently and released in the same year. With audiences eager to learn more about this universe, The Matrix Reloaded boomed at the box office, earning $741 million on a $150 million budget. But critics were not quite as pleased with the sequel as they were with the original, thinking it was more of a triumph of style over substance. From what I could tell, Reloaded suffered from a few different pitfalls. After the original concluded with Neo being the one, and essentially being unbeatable in combat, the story was no longer about the characters digging deep, overcoming impossible odds, or discovering something new about themselves, but instead became a story about explaining the complex and often convoluted mythology of the Matrix. This makes the action sequences involving Neo visually entertaining, but there's never any real sense of threat in the air. For the most compelling sequence of the movie, the freeway chase, Neo has to not be present, as otherwise the objective is simply too easy to complete. So instead of learning about his own personal limitations, Neo is now being told why he's able to do everything, and how this universe works, putting a heavy reliance on dialogue. But the dialogue is quite poor throughout, as the Merovingian delivers bewildering and often tiresome monologues about cause and effect. All of this is informational, but doesn't make much material difference over what we're seeing. In its simplest form, they need the Keymaker and have to fight off bad guys to get him, while also kissing Monica Bellucci along the way, because why not, I guess. Towards the end of the story, Neo meets the architect, the creator of the Matrix, and has pages of convoluted exposition handed to him in cryptic form.
Ergo, those that refuse the program, while a minority, if unchecked, would constitute an escalating probability of disaster.
Despite so much being said, so much still remains so unclear that Neo, our protagonist, is reduced to only offering simple clarifications, like character names, or giving basic directions to the audience about what all of this rambling is even about.
Trinity, the Oracle, This is about Zion.
And the third key problem is how much time is spent in Zion or on the ship itself. Audiences fell in love with The Matrix because of its style, the questions it posed about the nature of reality, and its cool action sequences. The ship scenes were a functional part of the story, but never a truly appealing factor. But Reloaded spends so much more time in both Zion and on the ship. So instead of the exciting green-tinted Matrix world where the characters can do amazing things, they get bogged down in local politics, attending tiresome council meetings like the Star Wars prequels, and instead of slow-motion action sequences, it gives us slow-motion rave scenes in Zion. In the original, we spent 28 minutes and 15 seconds of the story where the main action is either on the ship or in Zion. But in Reloaded, this increases to 41 minutes and 18 seconds, which means there's a full extra 13 minutes in this far less appealing brownish, greyish, bluish colour palette where the characters are mere mortals. Despite these flaws, the freeway chase is incredible, where the obstacles just keep escalating, from the interesting new threat of the twins mixing with the old threat of the agents, and the predictable threat of the police. This sequence made the entire venture worthwhile. If we look at the 10 qualities that made the original so good, only 5 of them are really present in this installment, but in some categories, it truly exceeds expectations. So I think a 3-star rating, possibly 3.5, is fair. Then comes The Matrix Revolutions, which was critically panned and commercially underwhelming. Although still a financial success, hauling in $427 million on a $150 million budget, the appetite for more Matrix had clearly shrunk. Something about these new installments was not resonating with audiences in the way they had anticipated. Whereas most trilogies would identify the audience reaction and course correct, the third movie was already shot at the same time as the second, and clearly never saw it coming that audiences would have little to no interest in the Zion aspect of the story, demonstrating a clear preference for the exciting, limitless world of the Matrix, which is what the original sold itself on, instead of this bland, generic sci-fi world of machines. As a consequence, The Matrix Revolution goes all in on its greatest weakness, spending 71 minutes and 16 seconds either in Zion or on the spaceships, outside the Matrix. To add insult to injury, starting at the 35-minute mark, there's a full hour and 6 minutes dedicated to a conflict on the ship, council meetings, and an exhausting battle sequence against the machines. There's actually a moment that perfectly illustrates the problem with the movie, in which Neo and Trinity briefly escape the dark, depressing robot world of Zion into the beautiful, bright clouds above. Beautiful. They get a brief moment of pleasure before dipping down right back into the dark, depressing drudgery, feeling as disappointed as the audience. Just keep in mind, here is why you wanted to watch The Matrix and were excited by the prospect of the trilogy. Here is what they served you for over half the movie. The few scenes from Revolutions that are in The Matrix suffer similar pitfalls to Reloaded, in which the scenes tying together the action sequences are somewhat disjointed and convoluted. The opening gambit in which Trinity and Morpheus have to save Neo from the train station involves them breaking into the Merovingian's club and being held at gunpoint, forced to listen to another one of his tiresome monologues. The scene then transforms into a Mexican standoff, but instead of resulting in any action, just results in Neo being freed, which is cool, I guess. The final sequence in The Matrix, in which Neo fights Smith, is certainly well made, but it's also extremely repetitive, either involving them both smashing into each other for an epic bomb of impact between good versus evil, or a kung fu sequence, or them both grappling as they float into the sky. Despite the increase in budget and supposed improvements in CGI, the 1999 battle between Smith and Neo remains the most satisfying, both visually and narratively, as it was fresh for the audience but also has actual character development within the scene itself. Whereas in Reloaded, similar to most sequels, the assumption is that more equals better, so more and more Smiths keep appearing like copies out of a printer, making the whole thing feel monotonous, as Neo is never really even challenged, except for a brief moment at the end. And in Revolutions, the battle scene drags on so long that it actually made audiences realize that they're not just not into Zion, but kind of over the whole Matrix universe itself. And that's how the trilogy closed, with key characters killed and whether you liked it or not, the story was finished and the main conflict resolved, ending on a 2-star note. Until December 2021, when the franchise needed to be rebooted so they could finally clear up that, well, okay, there was nothing really to clear up, but the movie itself suggests that the studio was going ahead with it one way or the other, so this time just Lana Wachowski came back to co-write and direct. The Matrix Resurrections is a puzzling project from start to finish. It's a movie no one asked for, no one needed, and it seems no one particularly even wanted to make. This time they got the memo that fans weren't that interested in Zion or being on the ship, so there's only 37 minutes and 42 seconds dedicated to that. But bizarrely, they took the Matrix universe that everyone knew and loved and turned it into something else entirely. In this Matrix reality, now Thomas Anderson believes that the movie trilogy he starred in were actually just a series of video games he created and that everything else he feels about them is a mere delusion. So he has to attend therapy to talk about his feelings. The first half hour is set in corporate offices, with Thomas Anderson being pitched soulless ideas for a reboot of the Matrix franchise, which makes him feel empty and protective of his creation. Until a recast Morpheus calls him at his office, just like the original, but this time accompanied by other fans of the trilogy movies, all aiming to wake Neo up and basically go through the exact same story beats as the original, like choosing between the red and blue pill and training how to fight. But this time, these new characters are just trying to remind Neo that all of the original trilogy actually happened to him, so he can save the day again. Making the whole movie nothing more than a, hey, remember when we made The Matrix and how cool it used to be? Tribute, more than an actual story. There's so much off about this story that it actually makes you yearn for the days of nitpicking small details in Reloaded. The tone is utterly perplexing, part depressive drama, part tribute, part self-aware comedy, with action sequences edited like The Bourne Identity, plot reveals and team gathering sequences constructed like Mission Impossible, and the key theme of the story is about the power of love. It doesn't really try to create any new iconic moments, and seems to only exist to give the main characters a happier note to finish on, rather than the bleak ending of Revolutions. If we look at the 10 qualities that made the original so special, Resurrections sadly possesses none of them. It doesn't even have the same music, or the same signature green tint we're used to experiencing when we're inside the Matrix, making it more like a piece of fan fiction Rick and Morty might stumble onto in their interdimensional cable gags than anything to do with the original trilogy. And after an abysmal opening weekend of just 12 million, unlike Reloaded's 97 million at the height of its powers, it seems that the producers are signaling that the Matrix franchise is truly over for good. And that's how, sadly, the Matrix franchise started so strong and got weaker and weaker with each installation. Perhaps fans only ever really wanted the team to be engaging in exciting slow-motion action sequences inside the Matrix for a while, but instead were served up a convoluted mythology set against an uninteresting backdrop and capped off with an interminable micro-machine battle against robots that could have been from any generic sci-fi flick, only to be brought back to life for a farewell tour that's insecure about its own existence and has nothing new to offer except nostalgia. So let's try to just remember the Matrix for what it was, and perhaps even what it could have been, enjoying the original, accepting the trilogy sequels, and ultimately suppressing Resurrections as some sort of fever dream that never really happened. And just pray that we never have to endure the possibility of a further Matrix rebooted, recycled, refurbished, repeated, or recalculated, as it seems the deeper we venture into this universe, the shallower our interest becomes. Well, you've made it this far, so you might as well like, comment, and subscribe to help get this channel to the next level.